we are, there's some confusion about how we might proceed with this action item. So we've heard recommendations from public impact, and now we need to hear recommendations from the turnaround committee. Cheryl Pruitt, are you wanting to speak now before we begin the next portion? Okay, okay, no problem. So, Dan, I guess we need to hear the school turnaround committee recommendations.
Thank you, Superintendent. I appreciate it. We've already made some comments. Just want to reiterate, we had a lot of wonderful input. We've had a lot of dialogue at these public forums. Staff, working closely with this committee, has helped us put these recommendations together, and I would ask them to present. But before then, are the other committee members, Mr. Walker, Ms. O'Brien, do you want to say anything about our work? You ready?
I'll wait after the presentation.
Okay, thank you. Claire, would you mind going through this for us, please?
Certainly. And just to clarify, the public impact recommendation came to the committee at its final meeting November 17th. They debated, they modified, and then they came up with their recommendations, which was at the tail end of the long report, and then we pulled it out, summarized it, and that's what the recommendations from the committee are. And there are two components. There's the actions and policies to refine the State Board of Ed school intervention model, and then there's the specific recommendations on the schools that had filed petitions for relief to the State Board of Ed, as well as the 2 additional schools that have now received an F for the 6th year in a row that the board is obligated to take some action on. So starting first with the refinements.
Excuse me, Claire, before you go forward, do we have it to put on screen so people can follow along?
We debated doing that and decided not to. We could probably pull it up, though, if you'd like to do that.
Yeah, I think we should put it up so people can see.
While she's pulling that up, I'll start talking if that's okay with you.
Mhm.
So the first topic area was human capital and talent, and I will not belabor this because you made quite a few comments at that time, but the recommendations are first to seek support from the Commission for Higher Education to emphasize turnaround skills development in our state's teacher preparation programs. That was one recommendation. The second is ask the legislature to create a talent acquisition and retention fund devoted to turnarounds that would be administered by the State Board of Ed. The third would be to establish partnerships with existing talent development organizations to increase the supply of talented educators that are coming into our turnaround schools. And then the last is, under this topic, is identify and disseminate innovative staffing models that allows for maximum impact for your very best educators to be getting in front of school students in these struggling schools. So I'll pause there. I don't know, Dan, as the chair, if you want to say something about this topic, or I should just keep going.
Well, starting with leadership, the key there, you have to have people who are committed to it, rewarded for it, and allowed to use their creativity. And it's very much a corollary with the strategic plan. You build up the human capital around this effort over a long period of time in advance and while it's going on intensively. And I just think there's no one arguing with that.
And there are people out there that want to do that work, Dan. BJ was just sharing with me at the beginning of the meeting that the principal at Glenwood, was it, BJ?
Yes.
Actually left
Principal and teachers as well. Every teacher that's there.
Can you tell the story better? You can tell
Yeah.
better than I.
Sorry. I didn't mean to cut you off. I did.
No, that's good.
The teachers were allowed to transfer in and transfer out of Glenwood Academy, and it was, there's no hard feelings. If this work's not for you, you're not a bad teacher. It's just you're better suited somewhere else. So everyone that's there now has actually chosen to transfer in and begin that
They
building,
opted in.
and it's made a tremendous difference.
And the principal there apparently left a very successful school
Yeah.
to come take up the work at Glenwood.
No, there's people called to the work. What we're talking about is support systems, best practices, professional development, working with higher ed, principals academy, et cetera, to do it more forcefully and get a bigger bench.
And there's a huge need for the most recent grades that just came out by this board in November. We have more than 100,000 students in DNF schools in our state. So it makes sense for there to be a coordinated strategic effort around building the supply of talented leaders and teachers wanting to do this work.
So this should coordinate well with our strategic plan.
Correct. The second area is this turnaround unit recommendation, and the committee is recommending establishing the turnaround unit versus the separate LEA, which was one of the two recommendations from Public Impact. That would have direct reporting and accountability to the State Board of Education. Of course, would have to coordinate and collaborate with the Office of Outreach of the Department of Education so that there was clear lines of authority and not overlapping activities, which, by the way, was a common theme that we heard during all the committee meetings from everyone involved in this work currently.
By the way, research backs this up. It's not really a feeling we had. We talked to a lot of experts and looked at this situation. And if you look at in for-profits or other kind of hospital healthcare, if there's a stressed unit, you give a clear line of sight who's in charge. You cut loose some of the bureaucracy or whatever's in the way, and you say, here's the deal. And you get to report board, who's in charge, and they go. And that made it very clear. Actually, in Evansville, they're practicing this. And they said that was an essential element, and then we had input from other research around the country. So this is simply a way to make sure if somebody gets in this category of schools, which I agree with Superintendent earlier, her job's keep them out of there and her staff. Once they're in there, we need to change the structure. And this aligns them with the board, with the authority that put them there, and the board that will get them out. So that's all that's about.
So Claire, are you speaking from a 9-page document?
Actually, I think it's a 9-page document. I can't remember how many pages. I believe so, yes. That was sent out last Wednesday.
Do we have them up on the screen yet?
She's working to pull it up right now.
Because I didn't see any of what you just said in the document. That's why I'm asking.
It's,
It's the very first part on the first page, and just got to the second page.
I'm talking about, you've entered the second area called SBOE turnaround unit.
Correct.
And
So I just said the first point
I don't see
there.
anything in here about outreach or anything. So I
No,
wanted to know if I have the correct document.
You do have the correct document. I was just amplifying and summarizing some of the conversations that took place. This was intended to be a summary document.
But we're going to take action on it.
Yes.
We'd like the board's endorsement.
The second recommendation under this topic is that the turnaround unit would establish avenues for local community-based councils to be informed of and involved in all the work of turnarounds that, as Public Impact, Brian Hassel spoke at some length earlier about. The third is having the turnaround unit establish the MOUs and contracts, and Tony has talked about this, that are three-way if there's a third party involved, with the State Board of Ed, school corporations, and external partners if there are external partners involved, that clearly identifies the operating conditions, the performance expectations for both the third party as well as the school corporation. And Brian went into great detail about that, so I won't belabor that. And then finally, this would require a legislative change, but modifying the statute so that the turnaround unit would have access to the financial resources and data necessary to conduct this work effectively. Now, an important piece here is, assuming the board actually recommends this, would be making sure that we worked with the federal government so that it was clear on what pot of money are we talking about. There's already lots of different funding streams that the department is responsible for administering and coordinating. This would have to also be carefully coordinated, so I just want to make that comment about that.
So I want to make it clear that you're going to be having conversation with the U.S. Department about the money that the Department of Education currently secures, and have access to that money rather than the Department of Education to do its job with the federal monies.
No, what I was saying is that if the board endorses this recommendation, both with our A through F changes that we're talking about, as well as this, it would be important to have a conversation with the appropriate federal representatives, both for our waiver and then for non-waiver funding and other things that we might receive to make sure we were in compliance, or what we needed to do to modify documentation to remain in compliance.
But the larger point that the committee, and you folks chime in, is consolidate your resources. It's just like the organizational structure. make it clear, consolidate resource. You don't want some from here. We want them to have a clear understanding how much is available, how long, because we're not gonna be able to subsidize forever. But I don't want them going year to year saying, remember the SIG discussions? I want them to know, here's what you're gonna get to turn this around. This is the sources. It's under this office's control. The board interceded, so the board's giving you the roadmap. And we wanna consolidate those resources and maximize efficiency and effectiveness. That's all that we're saying there.
And I'll just follow up on what Dan said, because it's hard to be accountable and responsible for something that you really aren't in control of. I mean, under the Indiana law, State Board of Education is responsible for turnaround schools. So as part of us fulfilling that mission, we have to sort of be aligned administratively and have the resources necessary to make sure that we can follow through on that effectively.
Yep.
So
Good job.
it's just a matter of just bringing it all up underneath the State Board of Education.
Thank you.
The next category is facilities, and this has been a vexing issue for a number of years, of which this board is very familiar with. So the committee spent quite a bit of time talking about this. The first was, as has already been discussed, school turnaround can't be thought of symptomatically. You have to think of it systemically. So it's a recommendation from the committee that before the board would take any action to intervene, and with existing interventions, you would work with the corporation to have a district-wide assessment, certainly of the need for the seats, and then the condition and utilization of the facilities. Because if you award a contract to a third party and they're saddled with a large aging facility that they can't fund because they have insufficient enrollment or for whatever reason, then that is not going to set that situation up for success, and it's going to lead to ongoing conflict, which has occurred both in Gary and in IPS. So that was one of their recommendations, that the board needs to have a better, bigger picture view before it is making any intervention decisions. The second is that the committee recommended that the turnaround unit have a school turnaround facilities fund, a revolving loan fund, which hopefully would not be necessary, or there wouldn't be a huge need for if you did this facilities assessment first. But that was a recommendation, that there be some ability to provide loans to do upgrades, et cetera.
Yep, but I'm gonna make a point there. We have a turnaround school in Gary, Indiana, Roosevelt, that's out of school a bunch of days last winter because boilers don't work. And so here we are trying to better serve a group of students who are in a disadvantaged situation, and we have a building closed. Well, that doesn't work. And so if we see those things, I want to be able to go in there ASAP, fix it, and make sure that the young people are where they can be taught. And I can't go through 50 layers. We have to be able to move, and that would give us the ability to move.
The third was the recommendation from the committee to modify an existing portion of the turnaround statute, which currently requires the district and the turnaround partner to be in a contract, and the district maintains the facilities, provides transportation, and again, that's been a source of ongoing conflict. So the recommendation is that in its place, the State Board of Ed would then have the statutory authority to transfer funding for facilities maintenance and transportation to a third party if one were selected. That was pursuant to an agreement, again, a three-way agreement between the State Board of Ed, School Corporation, and the turnaround operator on how best to provide those services. What makes the most sense, what's the most economical, what's going to set those students up for success in that school.
The one-size-fits-all model there just really doesn't work. I mean, every school could potentially be different. So we're just asking for the flexibility for this body to be able to negotiate those terms as part of the MOU. So maybe in one instance, it makes sense for a operator to contract for their own busing. Maybe in another situation, it makes sense to have the school district provide the busing. But we need to be able to take advantage of whatever economies of scale exist and cost savings, instead of just having by statute the relationship sort of cemented.
Under the facilities?
The statute that requires the school district to provide transportation and facility maintenance.
If we find out it's not working, if you'll notice, there's a common theme in everything that's good for kids, especially that have been struggling in a school system. We want every authority to move in the advantage of these children. And so if they're supposed to be providing a facility maintenance and cannot pull it off the district, I want to be able to move that over and get a contract someone who can. If they can't get them to school for us, I want to get someone who can. And I want to do it quickly. I want to have the board to have the authority to do it in a turnaround situation.
And the recommended action item, as I understand it, is a repeal of that statute, that
Yeah,
provision.
we'll have to work with the legislature.
Okay, moving on to funding. I apologize, we're having technical issues over there. But this is posted on the website for those who are in the audience. Under funding, again, in line with the talent acquisition and the revolving loan fund recommendation, a recommendation that there be a state turnaround fund established to supplement the federal school improvement grant dollars. And as Public Impact recommended, the committee endorsed that you need to have a strategic plan for having larger amounts in the first 3 years and then having a thoughtful tapering off so that by the end of the 5-year intervention period, they are self-sustaining and there's a solid plan that demonstrates to you that they will be. And then the second recommendation, in line with what Tony's just mentioned a moment ago, is to transfer authority to that turnaround unit to have the direct ability to allocate those SIG dollars. Now, again, it would be important to coordinate with the federal government to ensure compliance with their requirements and, of course, the Department of Education.
And I'm not really sure that one requires a legislative action. I mean, I'd be interested in hearing opinions of council on that, but we've sort of, by practice, the Department of Education has been administering the SIG grant. But I think there's a legal question as to who the SEA is or who the SEA could be with regard to that. It very well may be that for the purposes of administering SIG that the State Board of Ed is already the SEA. But
I don't
The existing
And there-
statute.
And therein lies the issue,
yeah.
Tony, that I brought forth. And so, let me be clear again about federal funding. All the federal funding goes to the state education agency, which is the Department of Education. And we have been utilizing some of these SIG funds to actually do some turnaround work. But in essence, what happened in law is that the state of Indiana has given the board authority to do turnaround work and did not fund it. It didn't fund it in any way. There's no monies that comes from the state level for you to do your work. The department, because we work with all schools in school improvement, have made priorities when we have schools that are underneath your jurisdiction. It is the department's role and responsibility as the SEA to work with all of these federal funds. In fact, if you look at turnarounds in other states, when the board is given authority, there's state money that follows, because we have an issue with supplanting money, and you can't supplant federal funds. And so we have things that are in this report and in these recommendations that are the purview of the Department of Education as the state education agency.
I wouldn't,
So I hear you, Tony, because you're really recommending that the State Board of Ed become the state education agency. And
Yeah,
not-
because the
and
state
not the
statutes
Department of
basically
Education.
say that the SBOE is the responsible for turnaround. So you're right, I'm saying that student and school improvement grant funds are essentially turnaround money. Although they come from a federal source,
They are not, that's the issue. In fact, if we could pause here for a second, because this is an important issue. Because we're really talking about the State Board of Education really taking on the state, being the state education agency in place of the Department of Education. And that's not how this works. So,
well, good.
Charlie, if you could come briefly, just briefly.
well, can we finish the
I
report,
don't-
the recommendation?
I
No.
just go through the recommendations, because we can get the lawyers to
No,
argue about this
This
later.
is an important point. No, we're gonna be
No,
voting
we're
on all this.
consolidating, no, we're not really, because what
We're
we're
not?
saying is, when we're not voting on a particular legal opinion where the money goes, or, actually, you could go to a lot of statutes. The board's supposed to make sure that the resources are aligned with the goals and objectives, strategic plan. I don't wanna decide that today. What our recommendation is, consolidate your resource around turnaround. We have the concept on the table. We can talk out the legal and how you do that later. The bigger picture item, where we want to be as a board and executive, is you have to consolidate resources around the effort. And we can parse through that, because we could spend all day on that legal question. We're not going to solve it here. The recommendation of the committee is we consolidate resources behind this effort, and we can parse out what the law says and who does what later. That'd be my
Dan,
opinion.
I respectfully disagree.
Well,
It says recommend the creation of a state turnaround fund to supplement SIG 3
right.
$1003 and provide adequate predictable. Then it says
Right.
transfer administration of SIG $1003 to the SBOE turnaround.
That's our
unit.
recommendation.
And I understand that's your recommendation.
And if you wanna argue the legality of it and discuss it, we can do that later.
I'm just gonna call up the person in charge of our
No.
federal dollars to just give a
It
brief
really
statement.
wasn't on our
We're not
committee.
gonna challenge anything.
It wasn't really on our
Charlie?
committee, but. Yeah,
So the
it would take
1003
legislation, obviously, we say that.
The
there.
1003A SIG dollars are part of the Title I grant that's given to the SEA every year, and then it's a pass-through then to school districts, right? But we can take 4% off the top of that for school improvement activities. A portion of those are allocated for the TSOs, but there's also a very strategic plan looking at all focus and priority schools, which is what 1003A is allowed to be used for according to the flexibility waiver. And so there's different levels of support that are given to those schools. For example, if you're in year 3 of F status, you may get X amount of dollars to implement something related to the turnaround principles, which may be contracting for a lead partner, it may be establishing a turnaround unit, it could be a variety of things as long as they line up with the turnaround principles. 1003G is an application that the Department of Ed applies for to the federal government and is granted. And this year we were granted that application. Or the award, which is roughly around $10 or $11 million, to then give out in a competitive process to those schools that are considered F status. And so we had roughly 30 or 40 applicants that applied, and about around 7 were awarded. But the dollars flow to the SEA, or the Department of Ed, and then are distributed to schools. 1003G is competitive, and 1003A currently is on a model in which is awarded based on how many years of F you have, TSOs included.
Thank you. You may continue, Claire.
Thank you.
I have a quick question, and I don't know if it's for Charlie or not, but I'm sitting here pulling up the federal regs because I used to administer Title I. Their definition, by the way, the federal reg definition of an SEA actually denotes the state boards of education.
Exactly.
So I don't want to add to the legal question, but if you go, and Charlie may want to look at that and comment on that, but I
Some
do
other
agree that
time.
the department has responsibility for the actual execution of filing paperwork, but if we're going to get technical, I think that we ought to go back and look at that because the federal regs are very clear in how they define, at least in definition under ESEA, what constitutes an SEA. Now, I'm sure in some other states, some states have deferred and their boards have said, we're going to let the department handle that, but I don't know that it's cut and dry like it's being presented here today.
No, there are states in which the State Board of Ed is the SEA. That is not the case in Indiana.
Well,
Well,
yeah,
we
it's-
might need
my-
legislation,
my-
as we suggest.
And
Right,
that's
Let's
why
keep
the
going.
conversation is
Right.
important, because it's way beyond what it is to do turnaround.
And I think that's,
You are actually recommending
disagree.
that the State Board of Education be the state education agency.
And we'll take it and figure it out later.
I've got a comment I can make.
Okay, Charlie?
Currently, the U.S. Department of Ed considers the Indiana Department of Ed as the SEA. In other states, it may look differently.
why is that?
I don't know the history behind that. We do apply for the state consolidated application for the dollars. So currently, we've applied for Title I, you apply for Title III, all those federal dollars, and the department has applied for those and was awarded that. It's part of the consolidated application. So if you consider the whoever is the SEA, then all federal dollars then would be flowing to that particular body. And currently, that's the Department of Ed from the U.S. Department of Ed's perspective.
And that's the implication of this.
Yeah, and that's possibly what legally is possible.
Okay, moving on to the next category, flexibility for school corporations and external partners. Again, going back to this theme that was identified by everybody involved with the committee's work, that turnaround is a systemic issue. And when you're in such a serious set of circumstances, you need to give maximum flexibility to the district as well as to any partners that come in to turn around a school to do their work on behalf of the kids that the State Board have asked them to serve. So there are a number of recommendations here. The first is to formalize the transformation zone as an approved turnaround strategy. The second is to no longer use the lead partner model as a state-directed intervention, as we talked about earlier, repurpose it as an opportunity for a district to make some own changes on its own earlier on. The third is to modify the existing statute to increase flexibility, both for the TSOs as well as school corporations, to implement the systemic approach. And the recommendations are specifically to allow school corporations to create a transformation zone that has, under SBO theory, I think this might be a typo, that has staffing and scheduling flexibility like the turnaround operators have. So allow the district to have that same flexibility. The second is to allow the TSOs with State Board of Ed approval to enroll students in lower grades to ensure earlier interventions are occurring in those feeder schools that are going into the school that's been deemed chronically failing school. The third is to allow charter schools operated by the TSO to be co-located within a turnaround facility. Again, that's another way of having a high-performing feeder that helps overall with the goal of turning around what is typically a failing high school but could also be a middle school. Expand the scope of House Enrolled Act 1321, which was enacted in the 2014 session for IPS specifically to create the innovation schools, and allow that to apply to every district in the state that has one or more school that is under State Board of Ed intervention, and allow the State Board of Ed to have that be one of its tools under the turnaround statute.
So it was my understanding that that was kind of like a pilot. Let's do it with IPS. And we don't even have any information, so why would we recommend something that we don't even know if it works yet?
Because it's a tool we want in our toolbox. We had these hearings.
But what research
And,
would support that? We haven't even done it yet.
Well, we've been in this business a few years. We looked at other places around the country what works, and you want a lot of alternatives. And it's been pretty clear to us you've got to look at a system approach and have all tools available. And so that's why we're recommending it.
And Dr. Farabee from IPS did actually make a recommendation to the committee that that be a tool that IPS be allowed to use to
Well,
address some of its
I understand
schools.
IPS. I don't understand expanding it to the whole state when we haven't seen if it works yet.
Well, if it's a tool that would work here and a tool that would work in another city, let's give it a shot.
Question to the chair. It's an option, right? It's not going to be mandated that every school
No.
uses this model. So we would look at the variety of schools and make a determination from an array of options. Is that correct?
Yes, that's
Thank you.
not a,
That's
it's
all I
not a
want.
mandate, it's a tool, Sarah.
Go ahead and continue, Sarah.
Part of my understanding with this component also, a big part of our conversation was that if we're going to have the utmost talent expanding that bench in the state of Indiana, we have to make it a desirable place to be. We need to get the right people in doing the right job. One of the issues that we continue to hear is that these operators who are coming in can't afford to continue to do business because of the scenario the way that it's set. So I think this just gives us a little bit further option also where we can create those feeder options. We can give them the ability to do business successfully and allow it to be a desirable position within the state.
And then the final recommendation under this sub-bullet here, and Brian Hassel spoke earlier about this, is allow the State Board of Ed to have, as an additional tool in its toolbox, the ability to assume management oversight of a failing school corporation as a matter of last resort. And you heard Brian mention that that's not a step you would enter into lightly, and you'd have to have a lot of upfront planning and coordination to even begin to contemplate it or certainly to implement it effectively. Next is to modify the existing statute to facilitate options for earlier state interventions by expanding the flexibility to implement turnaround strategies in both D and F schools, and allow greater flexibility for the State Board of Ed to support a school corporation's implementation of a systemic approach earlier on. And I will give you a couple of examples. The board talked about a situation where, or the committee talked about a school is an FFFF, and then they go up to a D, and then they go to an F again, and then it starts the timeline over again. So it both allows the State Board of Ed to make sure that it's assisting a school that's still very fragile and is not, is in need of assistance. It also allows the district, under this transformation zone model, to place more schools under this flexible systemic approach to addressing the root causes that have led to whatever particular school is deemed failing and under State Board of Intervention.
And I'd like to reiterate that that's the department's role, and they've been engaging heavily in that role, making sure that that occurs. Along with that, I would also say that we are required to not only monitor schools, we have to monitor schools 2 years beyond them getting out of the D category. It's required by federal government that we do so. So we already have this in place. We already do this work. And so, and making sure that that's going to occur. So I just want to let the board know that we do this already. We're required to do it. I don't think it's been done well, but we're doing it well. Making sure that we're having everything at the grassroots level, boots on the ground, making sure that we're monitoring schools. Those schools that I shared with you that got out of the focus and priority status, we have to monitor them for 2 more years, whether they're out of the status or not. So I just want to reiterate that that's part of what we do at the department.
The next recommendation is moving the timeline up from 6 years to 4 years. And the reason for that is, in practical terms, once you've determined that a school is an F for 6 years, you're talking about November of the 7th year. Then the board has to deliberate, issue an RFP, select a partner, you have a transition year. By the time you actually start implementing the turnaround strategy, it's year 9, sometimes year 8 if you're lucky. And was simply unacceptable to the committee for such a long time frame for kids to be in a failing school. So their recommendation is to move that up to year 4, 4 years as an F.
Well, I'm going to ask for some clarification on that point, Claire,
Yep.
from the committee members, because I was under the impression that we were recommending intervention after 4 consecutive years of a D or an F.
Yes, you're right. I said it in the bullet above, and it's just not written in this next one. Yep.
So,
And
I mean, it's,
and I guess I would reiterate, we're already doing intervention. That's what the department does. It's responsible for that. We already do all of this. We hope you've had fewer and fewer schools come to you at year 6. There's like
And
there's a
And it
reason
may
for that.
just be that at those 4 years, if the department comes and says, here's our intervention, you know, maybe that's all the doctor ordered, so to speak, but we'll work through that. The larger point again, at the board level and executive level, we can't wait 7, 8 years, and we want to give people a chance that run these schools, creativity to get on this and move off the dime. So that can all be worked out. The
Was
larger point is what we're trying to make here.
David?
Question, just for clarification, did the committee talk about 4 consecutive years or 6 consecutive years? The word consecutive implies 4 years in a row, 6 years in a row. It's totally possible you could have a school have an anomaly, I'll call it, to be positive, that 1 year they're off the DF list, and then the clock restarts again. So within a 12-year period currently, there could be a number of children who are being impacted.
I think that's something we ought to keep studying, but I think the larger point was if you have 4 years in DNF status, we should be very concerned and not continue to allow young people's lives.
So
to
you
be
made a
impaired.
conscious effort to put consecutive in there for now as a
Yeah.
placeholder. We can reconsider that as we
And-
work
and-
on it? Is that-
Yes, and as the superintendent keeps pointing out, you know, the department should be monitoring and improving schools all along. So those anomalies, hopefully they're picking up on. Sarah?
and currently it's a consecutive 6. So,
I understand, and that's the concern I'm hearing from
Yeah.
constituents, that 6 seems like an awful long time, especially when you can drop out for 1 year. The other phenomenon that I'm seeing nationwide is a school corporation will close a school, a failing school. They'll close a school, create a magnet school within the school corporation, and then suddenly they don't have a failing school. And what they do, they take the personnel and the students and just reallocate those students to another school. And I'm really not sure if that's really solving the problem and helping kids, or are we just moving kids around, sort of a shell game? And that's another concern I have, but that's another issue. But I think this is a good guiding principle, a good starting point to stimulate more discussion.
Sarah?
It may not be relevant or important to the conversation we're having right now, but I continue to hear the comment or the implication that turnaround is something that is new with the outreach department. I just want to clarify for the record, as someone who's been on the board, there was a turnaround office before, and this work has been ongoing, and these points have been considered. We're evolving, we're continuing to grow and learn from what works and what doesn't, but I just feel it's necessary to clarify because I'm continually hearing that comment. And I just want to be clear for the record that.
And I guess my point, it goes to Dr. Oliver as well, is that this board has relied upon the Department of Education to do the work of turnaround, to actually implement pieces and make sure that we have it done. And not only has the department done that within its statute at year 4, 5, 6, we're doing it right away, like right away. We're not waiting for it to get to an intervention point before we actually entertain some of these ideas. So.
And that's good news, because then they won't end up here.
But I don't, that's the
job.
exact point that I've been making, is that now what is the reason for the board now to do it on its own?
Because we've learned a lot and refined our thinking, we understand research around the country, so we're improving, moving forward. Always improving, always changing, always doing a better job for young people. That's all we're
And
doing.
quite frankly, I think we have to not forget, because it probably, at least in the back of some of our minds, was a factor, that it was just a few months ago that we couldn't get our ESEA waiver approved because one of the issues was the U.S. Department of Education said the Department of Ed was not properly dealing with the focus and priority schools. That's a fact.
That's a fact.
I really am going to take exception to that, Tony, because it didn't have anything to do with my department. It had everything to do with my predecessor. They had 5 people there, could not do the work of
11 people in
300
that
schools.
office.
There were
11
11?
people in that office.
300 schools. We now have 23 people on the ground.
For the turnaround schools. I think you're playing with numbers.
Yeah, and those, I mean, outreach coordinators in my area do a great job, but their responsibilities are not limited to turnaround. I mean, they're doing a lot of stuff.
Sarah?
Just one final comment, and I think we've gotten off focus, and I think this is quickly becoming a board versus a department issue, and
It
it's
is.
not. I
It
see
is.
this as the committee doing investigation, talking to the people with their feet on the ground about what's working and what isn't, and making recommendations on how we can fix it and streamline it and make it successful throughout the state. I don't want this to be a conversation
There's
about what
something
we're
very
doing versus
defensive
what.
there.
It is,
You're very
Dan, it
defensive.
is, because you're really suggesting being the state education agency. That's what this whole
That's
thing is
not true.
about.
That's not, that doesn't say that.
Carrie?
So the board has some statutory duties, and one of them is to oversee failing schools. And so nobody wants that job. Nobody's gonna relish that job. Nobody's gonna enjoy the day school has to come in front of us and be faced with that. So, but it's been assigned to us. There would have to be some oversight then of those schools. There has to be some ability to have some input into what happens there. The DOE has some statutory responsibilities, absolutely. And they're so intricately tied together, we can argue about where one starts and where one ends. I think what's too bad is that there's this generalization that the board is one lump group and it's the board versus the DOE. And I don't like the generalization. I think it's unfortunate. We're a group of individuals, all of whom would have our own individual opinions on it. I also think it's unfortunate, though, that some things I feel like with all the talk of dialogue, and we try to dialogue, and that the board is left out, and I'm going to generalize, the board is left out of dialogue, or at least I am as an individual. I wish we'd have, Superintendent, I wish we'd have had some of the conversation you're having today, yesterday on the phone, 2 days ago on the phone. I haven't missed any phone calls. I mean, there would be any opportunity to get some of the information, and so I get information from the committee, and I read it, but I don't get information from the DOE, and again, it's a generalization because it's us versus them, and it shouldn't be that way. I would welcome a phone call so that I would have the opportunity to give some input.
So Carrie?
No, but let me finish. I just feel like it gets to then the point where the board, again, I'm generalizing, where I feel like we're sitting here and it's us versus them because this is the only chance I have to make the statement, or this is the only chance I have to say, I am morally responsible for some of this, and I feel the weight of that, but I have no other opportunity to voice that. And so we get here and it becomes a battle when it could have been a phone call to ask.
it's really not.
And I don't want it to be us versus them. I just feel a responsibility to do my statutory duty because these kids deserve it. And yet, in order to have my say, and in order to feel like I've done my duty, I've done my due diligence, it becomes a battle in the middle of this, as opposed to a conversation or information that you could explain to me what all is going on.
So Carrie, let me talk about that, because that is a problem with that the board and the leadership at CC have with the department.
My
So
phone,
let me,
but this isn't, I have a
this is
phone,
not about,
nobody's called me.
this is not about personal conversations. This is about making sure that the board is aware of what's going on. So there are several instances that have occurred, and they're all unfortunate. They're all unfortunate. Because we've had meetings with CC regarding our work with Gary in specific. I don't know that you've received any of that information. I have requested at not the last meeting, but the meeting before, we requested when you were in Gary, Indiana, that we have speakers on to address the very issues. At the last meeting, I requested that there be a presentation regarding the turnaround, and we were told, no, we don't want to rehash anything, we don't want to hear about that, but I did get a note saying, Glenda Ritz, if you personally want to come, you da-da-da-da-da. Well, that was not my intention because I had other obligations. But I had staff who were needing to make some information and supply that to you. I have been turned down in many instances with giving information or having information supplied. Public impact, you want to get into it? Public impact gives you an initial report. Not once, interviewed lots of people, not once did they interview the Department of Education to see what we were doing. Not once. I insisted in my conversation regarding the last turnaround committee meeting, I insisted that public impact interview and talk with Teresa in my department regarding the efforts that we are doing.
Well,
And you see a couple of lines, Carrie, now in the report. And all of a sudden, oh, we want to work with outreach. Outreach has never been mentioned in any report, in any piece of dovetailing any work. It is about you as the board overseeing, not when schools get to you after we've made sure that they don't get to you. It's all about taking over the work of the department earlier and earlier and earlier in intervention. I'm going to reiterate again, that's what the department does. That's all it does. It takes the federal money through and it improves schools. So we can talk about where breakdowns happen in communication, Carrie, but the point is, this board hasn't been very interested in what outreach does. It hasn't
Superintendent.
been very
Madam
interested in
Superintendent,
presentations.
No, let me,
It
seriously.
hasn't.
Now, if Doug Thiem, who is my representative for my area, calls me, I would call him back. I've had lunch with him several times. I have never not answered a phone call from any member of your staff. And so I am very upset by the implication that if you put CECI in the middle, that's your doing, that's not mine. I have never not taken information from anybody on your staff. I have never not called someone back. I have never not received an email and answered it. And so I am not putting them in the middle. Someone else is putting them in the middle. And I am unhappy with this tone of voice as if I'm, a child who is getting reprimanded. I've spent my whole life working for kids and working on my classroom and working with education, and just as much as hearing you tell everybody you are too, and I'm frustrated by the fact that I'm not in the middle of anything. I would be happy to have you call me anytime. I would happy to have any of your staff call me anytime.
This is not about personal conversation between the
It is
superintendent
about
and
it.
board members.
Then have your
It
staff.
is about our communication with the board needing to happen through the State Board of Ed staff.
No, it
No, they
doesn't,
do
but
not.
that's where
No,
you're
they
so
do not.
wrong. If you
They
just
could
pick up
call
the
me
phone and call
anytime.
any of us,
And that's
we
my
would
point.
talk.
And
This
what-
is
A lot of
not-
these
it
issues
is
could be
about
resolved
individual
before we come to a
conversation.
meeting.
I'm an individual. I have an individual vote
I'd
on
like-
here.
yeah. And I would also like to emphasize.
we're at-
You're
we would've
choosing to
been
deal with
so-
another group.
No, now you've made a lot of comments that are just so totally wrong, they have to be clarified. We've had 4 meetings, you haven't shown up. This is a big important thing now to you. We've heard nothing. Secondly, I went to a lot of meetings, did a lot of travel, and if you would have come, we would have loved it. Secondly, we had input about outreach coordinators going to turnaround schools, et cetera. We have that input, we have it in the notes. Matter of fact, some of the schools that are in turnaround mode commented that it was a problem because you have this office visiting, this office visiting. The principal wants to run the school and turn it around. So they wanted a coordinated, consolidated effort. This is not how you're characterizing it. And you come here today, you seem very defensive and all concerned about turnaround. We've worked very hard at this. This is not a political process. This is about children in schools that are basically robbing their future. We took it very, very serious. We worked very, very hard. You were always invited. We haven't heard anything. And now today I feel like it's as though we want to do something bad when we wanted to serve better. I appreciate your comments. But the comments that we haven't heard from outreach coordinators and your people haven't been invited and you haven't been personally invited and that we didn't want your input and involvement around this very important issue, most important issue. I can't think of a more important issue for us executive, the superintendent, if you have students struggling, their lives being compromised, that you wouldn't be involved in it. So today now, to pretend like you weren't engaged or we didn't want your input or involvement is just not true.
I would like to clarify that the first committee meeting, Teresa Brown was invited and made a presentation to the committee, and she had just made a presentation at a full board meeting right prior to that. Public Impact did interview Teresa after the November 17th committee meeting because we'd already had a large presentation, but very much took the recommendation and request from the superintendent, and so they did have the opportunity to interview her and look at the waiver as well before coming up with their final recommendation.
You're ready for performance criteria?
There was one other item under flexibility, which was utilize the existing statutory authority to allow students from more than one school to be served in the same facility. And then under performance criteria, and I won't belabor this, just you have to have a very clear set of criteria by which the board will decide whether or not to continue with an intervention, spin out a school as a charter school, or return it to the corporation. And that has to include an assessment of the corporation's readiness to sustain the work if the school has improved.
So are we taking a vote on this portion now? Because I see the rest of this report deals with very specific turnaround pieces, so I don't.
I'd respectfully request that the committee report, unless there's further discussion, be adopted by the board and we go in the future and work hard to implement this with the various nuances and legal opinions that we'll have to work with in the legislature, please. We worked very hard. We think they're good, solid recommendations and set us in the right direction. So I'd like the board support.
Is that your motion?
That's my motion.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any more discussion?
I'd
Roll
like to
call.
say a few
So, well, if the speaker is not here to speak on the turnaround recommendation, then we should put off the speaker. But if the speaker signed up to speak on what we're about to vote on, I want to hear from the speaker.
And I forgot to recognize her before I said, is that your motion?
Superintendent Word?
We haven't gotten to the point of presenting the information that the speaker's here to speak on.
On the floor.
I know, that's what I'm saying. We need to handle the motion. We haven't even gotten to school recommendations.
But if she's here
Yeah.
to speak on the turnaround committee's
That's why I asked
She's
her
here to
what
speak
she
on her
was here to
school
speak on.
recommendation.
That's what I'm asking.
Let's get clarification from the superintendent.
Dr. Pruitt,
Speak on your school's recommendation or the overall policy recommendation?
I believe the overall as well as my school. So
she
I'm-
signed
I'm-
up for,
I'm-
and that's
I'm
why
really
clarification. We have two things on the agenda, under action. One is Lincoln and Dunbar. It's a separate action item, yet I see them here in this report as well. And then Roosevelt is in this report as well. So why don't you just speak, and we have a motion to approve the beginning portions of this, Dr. Pruitt. So are you wanting, I mean, we could easily have you speak in the next couple of times, or?
It's whatever the board's pleasure is, because I'm really confused.
We haven't even given recommendations for Gary Community School Corporation yet, so how is she gonna speak on it?
She signed up for the turnaround issue, and that's the confusion that I've had the entire time, because we not only heard a report from turnaround, and now we've got a committee report, and we also have these individual schools that are listed here in the
Superintendent, can I
committee's
help
report.
put some clarity to this? I want to hear from the superintendent, but I think the general recommendations, we've done due diligence. We went to Gary, we've heard from folks on the ground there.
Mhm.
So these are our general recommendations of committee. I'd like the board to vote on that. And then when we get to the specific recommendations, because we've received input from Gary thus far on the whole turnaround issue, and then we can move the specific issues later, with all due respect. We have a
Okay.
motion, a second. These are general recommendations. The board's gonna do a lot more work on this with the legislature and others in the future, and then we'll go to the specifics afterwards. May we do
So
that? May we
Dr.
have a
Pruitt, are
vote?
you fine with that? 'Cause
I'm
you
fine
signed
with
up.
that.
Okay.
Yes, that was clarity.
So we have a motion and a second. Any more discussion? David?
I have a question for Claire. Claire, a number of these issues deal with legislation, and it's really critical to be able to operationalize these through legislation. Can you share the plan, the strategy, the tactics, or even the process that's going to be used to engage leadership, maybe the governor, in supporting some of these proposals?
Sure. When the resolution that the board voted on to create the committee was passed in July, I believe it was, one of the part of the scope of the committee's work was to make broad recommendations, specific recommendations in response to the petitions for relief that were filed by CSUSA, and because of the departure from Arlington of Ed Power Tinley, and then also to make recommendations to the legislature and the governor. So whatever the board decides on today, our staff will communicate that to legislative leadership and the governor.
Okay, thank you.
Roll call, please.
Mr. Albert?
Yes.
Mr. Elsner?
Yes.
Dr. Freitas?
Yes.
Mr. Hendry?
Yes.
Ms. Neal?
Yes.
Mrs. O'Brien?
Yes.
Dr. Oliver?
Yes.
Mr. Walker?
Yes.
Mr. Watts?
Yes.
Mrs. Wicker?
I appreciate the committee's work. I have some concerns about some of the specifics. No.
Superintendent Ritz?
No. The next point of action, I believe, will be Madonna recommendations? Is that correct?
I think so. Dan, do you want me to continue to walk through them, or do you want to?
Yes, please.
Okay. So the next set of recommendations is in response to the specific petitions for relief filed by Charter Schools USA, and then also the departure of Tinley from Arlington. And then subsequently, there were 2 additional schools that are now eligible for State Board of Ed intervention, one at Gary and one at Evansville. So the committee also included that in its recommendation to the board. The first is, it's actually Emmett Emmerich Manual, and Carr Howe together at IPS. Charter Schools USA asked for a 5-year extension on its current contract. The existing contract expires in 2016, and the committee's recommendation is to extend the contract by 2 years through June of 2015, and then modify the contract per public impacts recommendations and the committee's recommendations to ensure there are clear and explicit performance criteria for the Turnaround Academy to help the board make the right decision about what to do with the school at the end of that contract. In addition, establish a 3-way MOU between the State Board of Ed, IPS, and Charter Schools USA that clarifies roles and responsibilities and includes benchmarks by which to assess IPS's capacity to take the school back if that is what the board decides to do at the end of the contract term. Let's see here. And I'll stop there and let the committee talk about the rationale if they would like.
So we're only looking at the first area of recommendations. We're not looking at the other 2 pieces.
Well,
Is that, I just want to be sure what we're voting on, because in Medina, I mean, Charter USA also requested that they serve K through 8 students instead of just 7-8.
I'm not sure we're voting yet. If the board would like to, that's your pleasure. I just wanted to stop and see if there are any questions from the other board members on this recommendation.
And that was, the contract extension, a minimum of 2 years, there's a lot of different paths that could take, and the performance standards
That's
make
correct.
that clear.
Yes. And again, this goes back to the public impacts in-depth report and the committee's recommendation.
I think it says pretty clearly, extend the current contract through June 2018.
Right, that'd be a minimum.
Doesn't say that. It says, it goes on to talk about
You'll clarify the
transition options
conditions.
after that point
Right.
as to whether we're returning the school to IPS.
There's a lot of transition options. So you could continue with that, you could continue under 1321. I know Dr. Farabee and Mr. Hayes are having discussions about how do you collaborate. One of the big learnings we have, you've got to have a collaboration. The Charter School USA is running a school within a city and a district, and we're trying to make that all about kids and who can help one another be successful. So there could be a lot of options after 2 years. That gives them a minimum of 2 years to get further progress, and everybody sees where they're at. We see where the district's at, we see where Charter USA is at, and then we'll know how to proceed. We think it'll be more clear, correct?
This goes back to that chart that Public Impact provided, where you look at the ability of the corporation to continue progress and the ability of the school to succeed. So my thought was that once we get to that 2-year point at June of 2018, that chart would take over, assuming that we continue down this route.
And one of the questions I asked Dr. Farabee in one of our committee meetings was, how long would it take to properly transition any of these schools back into IPS? And I believe at that time he told me it would take probably 18 months to even properly transition these schools back. So in addition to all those factors, it gives them an opportunity to sort of maybe figure out what the relationship is going to be going forward and possibly start that transition.
Would you like, sorry.
Question, did Charter USA and IPS see this language and agree to this language and feel that it's a step forward?
I think it's a starting point, and they're discussing, we're looking, I haven't been in the middle of them, but they're really trying to look at what's best for kids, what are unique models, what are the collaborations, how do you work together?
So by us adopting this, we're helping the process, helping kids,
We at least clarify it
helping
this
moving
far.
forward.
There'll be some more
Okay.
chapters written, but
Right, we're not at the end of the book yet, we're just writing the next chapter, but if the partners agree to it, then it seems that we should support the direction they want to
step
move
to
it.
step.
Well, one of the items here is that Charter USA and IPS are preparing a plan to present today. Do we have that?
So that's the next item, which the other request that Charter Schools USA made was to be able to expand Emmett, which is currently a 7-8 only school, to be a K-8 school. And that would help to address some of the financial sustainability concerns that they expressed to the committee in the existing facility, as well as the fact that you're getting seventh graders who are so far behind grade level that it makes it very hard to do a turnaround for a seventh and eighth grade only. So by providing support earlier on, so this is the feeder system issue that has come up over and over again. So the committee recommends here, Board Council said the State Board of Ed does not have the authority under the existing statute to grant that request. And so for, the recommendation was either that the Emma Donnan students could transfer to Emmerich Manual, because Manual went up to a D. So under the existing statute, the students could be combined in one facility, and then the facility would go back to IPS, or CSUSA could work with IPS to come up with another plan and a recommendation. And that was the takeaway from the committee, was that they were going to work together to come up with a plan. So I don't know, Bob, if you have further comments on that.
So some of the items in this section seem to be in conflict with the first one. So it says allow Charter School USA to withdraw or modify its petition for relief if an alternative solution is determined, and yet we're extending the contract for 2 years.
Right.
So
Those are two separate issues.
I know, but I don't understand how one is separate, totally separate from the other.
Well, we know that under the existing arrangement that they're running Emma Donnan and Manual High School and Howell High School, that they'll have at least 2 years more. They can count on that to run it as is. But they have petitioned for some different arrangements, and we have a school district superintendent who's relatively new in discussions with this operator, looking at models and new ways to do, better ways to do this, and looking together forward. So we know at a minimum, we don't want to pull the rug from the operator, change administrations again. We're making progress. We know we want to stay there 2 years. What all could unfold and how that's arranged and what efficiencies we could put together, we're hopeful. We have the two parties discussing. So I think they fit kind of really nicely together. One, stability. We're making progress. Stick with it. Ride the horse, if you will. And then, but looking around the bend, what could we do even better in the coming year or in subsequent years? How can we do better? So that's all it's saying.
So their request for a 5-year extension was not based upon having not just a 7-8 school. They were requesting a 5-year extension for the 7-8, even if nothing else happened. That's my confusion. Are they willing to take on 2 more years as a 7-8 school?
They're committed. That's what I heard.
I think it might be better to go through all the recommendations, because they made them all together. And I think ideally they would have liked all of these things to happen together. And since I don't know the status of their latest conversations, you might want to hear from them and Dr. Farabee about what conversations they've had.
If we went through all the recommendations here, then we could hear from the participants.
We don't have any more for Emma Donna, do we?
The last one was that they requested the ability to place a K-6 charter school in the Emma Donnan facility. And again, General Counsel has determined that there is not statutory authority to grant that request. So that recommendation is no action at this time. But as you just voted on for the overall recommendations, that's part of one of the flexibility recommendations that the committee did recommend, and now the board has endorsed, would require a statutory fix.
So the only thing we can really vote on today is the 2-year extension.
Well, I would
with surety, because we don't have the plan and we don't have some other things. Am I reading this right?
Yeah, I think we would have to separate it out, and I definitely would recommend for the board voted to ask to hear from Dr. Farabee and Mr. Hage, since I don't know the status of their conversations. We did not receive a plan,
And
though.
what actually has to be decided today?
We extend the contract 2 years, but I also think it was important in these discussions and their presentations. There's a different, my committee members can add to this. I must say, from the time of the original intervention by this board and takeover, the attitudes among the district, Dr. Farabee's brought a whole different attitude. I think we've all learned a lot. This is about cooperating around children and making neighborhoods better. And so I think we have made progress to these, and I think all parties involved are saying this is a collaborative effort around children, their future, and our city. And so there's going to be discussion, and it's going to be long-term how we do this. But we minimally, we stick with Charter USA for 2 years, and we figure out long-term solutions together and in cooperation to the best of our ability. That's basically what we're voting on, gives us a path forward in a new way and a new attitude.
So Claire, what's your recommendation? We're voting on a 2-year extension, and then we'll bring it up at another time to see what the other plans are, or?
May
Yeah,
I
go ahead,
request to
Sarah.
hear from
Sure.
CSUSA?
Oh,
Yes.
that's fine with me if we
Have
want
an
to hear.
update on there.
Madam Secretary, Commissioner, I'm Superintendent.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Been in front of a lot of bodies lately,
Yeah,
sorry.
that's all right.
Dr. Farabee here. I think what we would say is that obviously we're making progress on the ground there. We are halfway through this turnaround contract. The commitment for teachers and principals and staff and students and parents to know that that progress is being rewarded with extension. We did ask for 5 years. We're grateful for the 2 years. I think that our perspective is that performance on the ground with the student achievement is only what we want to be measured by, and to the extent that that performance continues, then we would like to have options that are earned. And so Dr. Farabee and I have begun conversations with staff included on those calls to provide some beginning conversations that I think we still have a lot of ways to work through. I don't want to say they're concluded by any means, but they start with a good faith effort between both of us to focus on student achievement and focusing on the K-12 systemic issue and a performance. We do know 1321 is new law that has some flexibility allowed into that would be a way for us to maybe focus on this. There might be other ways as well too, and we didn't want to limit our thinking with his thinking or anybody else's thinking to something that wouldn't get to the sole solution of continuous improvement. We have seen that improvement now with one of the schools going to a D. We believe the other schools are very close behind in that. The data shows continuous progress. We believe that that progress will then allow for the board in the future to look at options and to approve what might happen long term.
Thank you, Dr. Farabee.
Thank you, John. I think John captured well where we are right now. There have been multiple conversations. We believe that there's a potential solution and a partnership between IPS and Charter USA. We're very mindful, though, as we have these conversations, of the impact of the decisions on the neighborhoods. And we want to also ensure that we're able to better utilize our facilities in the district and also those facilities that were once takeover schools. And so we have not been in favor of converting one of our secondary schools into an elementary school, but we're definitely open to continuing the conversation of how we can create a robust K-12 system of higher performance for those schools that historically have been struggling.
Thank you.
So what's the motion?
The recommendations are here before you if we want to take up the recommendations we've gone through so far. If you want to do these, we can do so, and then we go on to Arlington. But the Charter USA, Emmett-Donnan manual, and Howe is also extended in this, I believe. Yeah.
Seems like we should deal with the first three.
Deal with these.
So
First
Emmett-Donnan,
first three.
Emmerich Manual, Carr-Howe, we have recommendations before us. And so your motion is to accept these recommendations.
Yes.
Is there a second?
Well, I was gonna say, why don't we deal with all three relating to Emmett-Donnan and Manual?
We did.
I don't think we've gotten to all of
I
them.
think she just went over all three of those.
Yeah, I think we got
Cover
to
the last one?
She did.
I think we have it.
Let's do it.
Let's do it then. All right? So the motion on the floor.
Second.
Any more discussion? Roll call, please.
Yes.
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 Okay.
Yes. The next one's on Arlington.
Okay, why don't you say that?
The next one's on Arlington.
Can I make one comment about the previous discussion? Mr. Hage just commented that he would be willing to withdraw his petition of relief possibly at the next meeting as the three-way conversation continues and agreements and proposals are accepted and worked together. So we wanted to inform you of that.
So we should expect something to the board prior to the next meeting.
Hopefully, yes.
That's our hope.
Okay, with Arlington, because Tinley has notified the board that it is withdrawing, the committee considered what was the appropriate next step for Arlington. And given the lack of an identified partner, an RFP hadn't been gone through to find somebody to take over an entire school, and there was still the issue of the unsustainability of the financial model, the economic model, given the enrollment and the size of the building and the cost to maintain the facility. So the recommendation is for Arlington to be part of a new IPS transformation zone, and that would involve a number of steps. IPS would have to submit a plan to the State Board of Ed by February 2015 is the recommendation for improving performance at Arlington within 3 years. The State Board of Ed would either approve the plan or work with IPS to revise it to meet the state standards. And the recommendation is also that a draft be submitted for your review in January, so we can have ample time to have back and forth. Then the third recommendation under this category is that there would be a MOU between the State Board of Ed and IPS that sets clear performance criteria, consequences, expectations for operating the zone in line with everything you heard from public impact and the committee's recommendations that you just endorsed. And then extending the intervention status through June 2018 to allow them to have the full 3 years to demonstrate success under this model. And then IPS would identify a managing partner. If IPS identifies a managing partner, the State Board of Ed would enter into a 3-way MOU. And then the second recommendation related to Arlington is that IPS will assume direct management of the school, reporting directly to the State Board of Ed, and that the mayor's office, with whom we've spoken in advance, has agreed to help oversee an orderly transition as Tinley withdraws from the school so that student records are maintained and transfer back to IPS, et cetera. So some of the transition challenges we had when Tinley went into the school, we don't repeat those same mistakes again.
Ask a question.
Yes, Andrew.
So in essence, IPS becomes its own turnaround operator. Is that a fair way of describing this?
Well, part of the plan they would submit to you, they might choose to utilize 1321, which they currently have the authority to do, as part of their systemic plan for addressing the feeder schools as well as those schools that are under State Board of Ed intervention. They have authority to do as they wish with the schools that are not under board intervention. Now, based on the recommendations of the committee and the work of public impact, it's important to think systemically, and they've already taken steps to think this way and redesign how they're addressing the schools in their district that fall into this category.
And they may want to have a managing partner or some other arrangement
Exactly.
to give this the heft it needs, because it's going to be obviously a big job.
Can I ask so do they continue to get some unique funding then to turn Arlington around?
Well, because Arlington is still an F and under State Board of Ed intervention status, they're still eligible to receive the SIG dollars. And the board voted on funding for this year for turnaround academies, and as you recall, you tabled the recommendation for the following school year. And so that would have to come back before the board to figure out.
Okay, but they have the funding already for this year. Do they only have half the funding or all the funding?
No, they received a little over $1 million for this year, but for the next school year, there has been no allocation made.
actually my question. I was wondering about money and what money was tied to it.
I think it would depend entirely upon the plan they submitted to you and then the available resources.
Is this setting another option for takeover schools? For example, could another school corporation come forward and say, yes, we have a failing school that meets the takeover legislation, and we're going to run our own takeover operation with our own school?
And that's exactly what you just
Evansville
endorsed
did.
with that vote, that Evansville was actually, they started it on their own before Glenwood came under State Board of Intervention this past year.
Right.
And so this is an approach now that the board has endorsed as a way to have districts address the systemic issues themselves.
So the accountability is in the plan. They'll come back to submit to us to convince us that they're putting into place systems and other kinds of things that will catapult that school in a more positive manner. Is that?
Yes, which will be part of an MOU or a contract.
Okay. And so who's going to work with them on that contract? They work on their own and then submit it back to us, or do our staff work with them, or?
It would be the attorneys working on it.
The attorneys are going to work
Yeah.
on it.
That's a frightening.
So, on educational issues, attorneys are going to work on it?
You said on the you said on the contract.
Easy, David.
You said on the
That doesn't
contract.
give me a lot of confidence.
Well, what you just voted for was that any bold plan would have to come to the State Board of Ed for approval. So that would include all elements of the plan. And then once that's been approved, that would be part of what was entered into through an MOU or a contract.
It's possible some educators would also work in addition to lawyers on an educational
yeah.
plan?
Yes, of course.
Okay, thank you.
So what we're really doing in essence is giving permission to IPS to do its own transformation work, to reiterate what Andrea said. And they have funding through the regular sources, through Title. And they have regular funding to do that work, just as Evansville had their regular funding to do that work.
Correct.
There's nothing preventing any school district in the state of Indiana from doing transformational work. In fact, that's encouraged, so that the board does not need to intervene. But I want to make a distinction, because the vote that was prior to seemed to indicate that legislative action was needed to give the board authority to dictate that you would be a transformational zone. So I just want to be sure what we actually are saying here.
No.
Sarah?
I think we've used some creativity in making it work thus far, but that's why it was important for us, from the committee standpoint, to formalize it so that we could be much more specific and strategic about how we proceed. And I think in response to your question, any corporation can choose to do this on their own at any point when they
Right.
see a need.
Sure.
Our standpoint was that if we get to this point, whether it's year 4, whether it's year 6, wherever it might be, that this is one of the options that we could choose to put in place with the specific guidelines that would be formalized under statute with what we had just recommended.
It's important.
I think this is one of the best options, that you grow within, that you transform your own schools within the local communities, and some of us have been big advocates for local control of schools. So I again, support what was done in Evansville, and I think this is a positive step forward for us, and it should apply maybe in more cases. I would hope that school corporations don't wait till year 6 or 4,
No.
whatever it is, and early identification and really put some intensive and intrusive kind of transformational principles in place. So hopefully this is the start of a new way of looking at this and really get ahead of the game.
A point of clarification, these schools are already all under intervention. They were designated chronically failing schools, and I guess one option is just turn them all back and say, well, everything's fine, but that's not exactly where we're at. We have a new superintendent, wants to move forward boldly, IPS board that wants to move forward. They want to create a plan to have a transformation zone to get, now the stakes are high, because they're under intervention and they have to make progress, and those standards will be in there. But this is well within our authority, that these are under the board, so I would hope that our board staff, IPS, we put together this bold plan, fine tune it, we agree to our expectations, and together we move forward.
And because the mayor's office is currently
Yeah.
conducting the oversight, I think they should be intimately involved
For the
in
transition,
that, as
yeah.
well as the Department of Education, of
Yeah.
course.
So in the turnaround options that the board has, that we're taking action on,
Mhm.
would this be the option in which the school corporation has put forth a plan to do the work? So that would be the option that we're taking here today?
Yes, and I should
I don't
probably go
remember
on,
which number it is, but
I should probably go on to the next recommendation, because included in the transformation zone, the other recommendation would be for the former lead partner schools, Washington, Marshall, and Broad Ripple, to also be part of that transformation zone plan. The board's authority currently extends only to those 4 schools with IPS. If they want to include other schools, that's their prerogative. The MOU between the board and IPS and any third party would be related to those 4 schools under board intervention.
So simply stated, the 4 schools we intervened on have to be in there, we have to see the plan. Dr. Farabee and his commissioners may want to look at the whole feeder systemically, I hope they do, frankly, and then we'll see their plan. So this vote we would take goes Arlington through IPS, Washington, Marshall, Broad Ripple. Those would be kind of seen as a package. And then that's, the school corporation comes back with a plan to turn them around, any aid or assistance they're gonna use in this effort, how we're gonna measure it, how we'll all be accountable, the reports we'll get, transitions the mayor's office out, and gets clear line of sight. Then again, it takes away some of the clutter and who's gonna visit. This is what's gonna happen.
so the board's action today will be taking their recommendations, or making sure that their plans meet what we want them to do, but taking their recommendations at the district level to do the work.
Exactly,
That we have, that's one of our options by statute.
yes, in alignment with the criteria that the board has just voted on for what this transformation zone needs to look like. So that will take back and forth on what are the performance expectations that we're talking about. So one of the things I want to get your guidance on is the timing. So getting a draft plan by January and a final plan by February would be ideal for figuring out a good transition. That might be aggressive.
Yeah,
But we
I
can't-
like aggressive.
Yeah,
If we set that as a timeline, we'll hit it or get close. But these folks, teachers, everything,
you can't wait too long.
The late in the day transition isn't so happy. So,
Yeah.
yeah, let's keep it aggressive.
So we have a motion before us to approve the recommendations to have plans from IPS submitted to do the transformation, to do the turnaround work for Arlington, Washington, Marshall, and Broad Ripple. Tony?
I'd just like to say that I hope the plan includes these feasibility issues that we've discussed, both at the committee level and partly today. And also, I would encourage them to come forward with an external partner, be it managing or support.
So are you adding an
No, I
amendment
was just
to the
making a
motion?
comment.
Oh, okay. Is there a second to the motion?
Second.
Any more discussion?
Yes.
Yes, Gordon?
I would just like to make the point that this is a significant day for the Indianapolis Public Schools. If approved, this proposal would be a significant vote of confidence in the new leadership, both at the superintendent and board levels, as well as the district's embracing of new reforms to improve the overall district. So I am in support of this. I applaud IPS and the reform-minded plans for the district, and I think this, if approved, again, will be a significant vote of confidence in the future of the Indianapolis Public Schools, of which I have a vested interest with a daughter in the schools. Thank you.
This is a vote for Gordon.
Roll call, please.
Mr. Albert?
Yes.
Mr. Elser?
Yes.
Dr. Freitas?
Yes.
Mr. Hendry?
Yes.
Ms. Neal?
Yes.
Mrs. O'Brien?
Yes.
Dr. Oliver?
Yes.
Mr. Walker?
Yes.
Mr. Watts?
Yes.
Mrs. Wicker?
Yes.
Superintendent Ritter?
Yes. Next is Glenwood.
Okay, probably, yeah. I'll take Glenwood and Lincoln together. So as you heard about, and you've heard Dr. Smith from Evansville present to you almost a year ago on the work that they're doing there, and the committee heard further from them down in Evansville. The recommendation here is to formalize the transformation zone in an MOU between the State Board of Ed and Evansville, according to the criteria you just voted upon, and to include now Lincoln, which is a new school eligible for intervention within that transformation zone. So that's the recommendation from the committee.
So move.
Second.
Discussion? Roll call, please.
Mr. Albert?
Yes.
Mr. Elsner?
Yes.
Dr. Freitas?
Yes.
Mr. Hendry?
Yes.
Ms. Neal?
Yes.
Mrs. O'Brien?
Yes.
Dr. Oliver?
Yes.
Mr. Walker?
Yes.
Mr. Watts?
I'll abstain.
Mrs. Wicker?
Yes.
Superintendent Ritt?
Yes.
And now would you like to hear from Dr. Pruitt?
Yes, but I'm not sure Dr. Pruitt has privy to this information.
It was posted on the, it was, sure, it was posted on the website.
Okay.
Hopefully she does have it.
Dr. Pruitt?
Good afternoon, Superintendent Ritz.
We are discussing Roosevelt right now.
That's correct, members of the board. I am here to represent the 7,000 students that I represent, their parents, our community and whole, and just all of the stakeholders that are involved in an effort to provide academic achievement for our students. One thing I want to also state to some of the board members that this is more humbling for me because I have had the opportunity to come back home, and so this is home for me. And I have had the opportunity to work as a teacher in this district as well as an administrator. And so when we talk about the issues that are in Gary, Indiana, they are no more concerning to anyone else than they are to me. And I just want to, I have to say that. And so with saying that, I want to also identify that it's not just an academic problem. We have more than just an academic problem. If we don't have finances to support the efforts that we do, then the academics cannot be achieved. And so many of you may know we're dealing with a 42% tax base. That over 5 years, the past 5 years, that's what we have received, about 42% of our taxes, in addition to our state aid. As we went into transformation, and this is going into my 3rd year as superintendent, so I inherited Roosevelt and Edison Learning. And during that time, when I first came on, as you know, Gary Community School Corporation was here often with issues of not getting a loan for the short of anything else. But since that time, we have changed that. And the president and CEO of Edison Learning, Tom Jackson, and I have locked arms to do what is best for the children and all children in Gary. As you know, when Roosevelt was taken over, we don't know if everything was looked at in terms of not only the academics, but also the financial. So when we talk about the buildings, when we talk about some of the other issues that directly impact student achievement, how do we reach that? So what we have come up with is actually a systemic approach, a comprehensive systemic approach. When the team came to Gary, Indiana, we talked about some of these things and some of the issues. And so that's what we want to talk about today. As you know, Edison Learning is the provider for Roosevelt. And Tom Jackson, would you please come up with me? And what we are proposing that Edison Learning serve as our external lead provider. And this is something I will be presenting to not only to you, but to the state superintendent, as well as to my board. That we serve that because there's a comprehensive look at the whole district that we need to do. We need to look at our finances, our HR department. We need to look at our buildings and grounds, et cetera, in addition to our academics, so that we can make certain that we touch every area of the district in order to transform it. And so with that approach, we want to look at a multi-year approach, focusing on the creating a financial improvement plan, a talent management improvement plan, and an education improvement plan. And we ask that the board allow us the opportunity to work together and to not decide on Roosevelt or Dunbar-Pulaski today, but to give us the opportunity to create that comprehensive plan of which we have started to do. And so we do have an executive summary that we would like to share with you, or I can turn it over to Tom, and so he can walk you through some of it. But I just want to make certain that we understand it's not just an academic problem. As you know, or you may not know, the mayor and I, we went to speak with Arnie Duncan with the National League of Cities. And there were other mayors there about a year ago, and other urban districts, superintendents that were there. And we talked about the issue of everyone coming together and working together. This has to be a collaborative effort in order for us to impact the lives of these children and these people that live in Gary, Indiana. And so with that, I just want to turn it over to Tom for a minute.
Good afternoon. I just want to say on behalf of Edison Learning that we certainly support the approach that's been identified by Superintendent Pruitt. One of the things that we've learned is that you can't simply tackle the problem with one school. What happens is you start to create the worst scenario is a system of have and have-nots, particularly where you have a systemic situation like Gary, where the problem is manifold. Superintendent is absolutely right. It is an inherited situation that is broad, it is complex, it is academic, it is financial, it is operational, and all of those have to come together. So what we've recommended and what we've begun to work on is what we call the Collaborative Comprehensive District Turnaround Proposal for all of the district. That will bring together a public-private partnership between Edison Learning and the district that looks at not only developing the school improvement plan that the superintendent Ritz has pointed out, but also looks at the financial situation in Gary. We've identified former individuals with Goldman Sachs who will come in to help to look at the financial picture. It was pointed out just earlier today that with a corporate turnaround, one of the first things that you do is you create on the ground a turnaround team, people who are embedded in the corporation, and in this instance will be embedded in the district under the supervision of the superintendent, who will examine from stem to stern fundamentally all of the financial woes of the district. So it looks at not only what are the budget issues that it has, but what are the debt issues that it has? How do you reconstruct the debt? Do you look at other ways of turning around the municipal debt that it has, of issuing bonds to generate the revenue that's going to be necessary to fuel the engine that is required to deal with this whole issue of the reduced property tax? We'll look at the entire issue around, do we have the talent? As you all know, and as the Massachusetts Insight reports indicate, you've got to have top talent in the district. And we'll look at this whole issue of facilities. How do you fund the changes and the challenges that you have with facilities? Some of them, to the point that's been made earlier, some of them we need to look at whether it makes sense to keep them open. Some of them you have to decide, what is it going to cost to change them? But we have students in buildings, and frankly, we have the district in a building that probably should have been condemned 7 years ago. That is not the stuff of which an effective turnaround can be made. And you can't do this piecemeal by sending in various people who all have different objectives. It has to be one coordinated, collaborative plan. And as the superintendent pointed out, we've taken the first shot at that plan. We've created an executive summary of the plan. It is, in fact, a bold plan. It is a plan that is built upon the pillar of local leadership, leading the way and collaborating with the state and with private partners and with others to make this happen. It is a plan that is going to require funding, and it is a plan that we would ask that you allow us to complete and to bring forward, to move forward for the students and the parents of Gary School District.
I think one of the big issues are partnerships and relationships. Edison Learning has been in Gary now for 3 years, I believe. And as we work through, relationships are huge. We can have a lot of different people, but I always look at things as your mindset, your skill set, and your heart set, and making certain that we all on the same page. So right now we're at the point of I can pick up the telephone and I can call Tom. I can say, you know, we don't have money to do this. You can say, okay, we'll help. Now, I've been to the governor's office, to the congressman, to the board, meaning, you know, you all know, and then in addition to the state superintendent, looking for money, finances. Regardless of how we got here, we're here, and these children deserve better. So the onus isn't just on me, it's on everybody here to do what is right. And that includes putting some money there, putting some money in Gary to help us with the financial issues, to touch the academics. So even though we may agree to do this, it takes money. And it doesn't take money from some of the other schools or some of those other children. It takes new money. And so that is something else that we are looking at. Since the state or whomever does not want to make certain that these underserved children are not served, we will find some more money, some new money, if that's what we have to do. But we're going to do what we have to do. And so we're presenting this to you now so that we can move forward and hope that you accept it and not disenfranchise the community anymore. It's already been disenfranchised. We need to come back together. We have the highest number of charter schools, or at least we did. We have vouchers. We have every educational reform effort that's supposed to work that has been put into Gary. It's time to stop. It's time to talk about how we pull it back together and make it whole so that we can have a viable community. And so for that reason, I don't know if you want a copy of the executive summary, but we have a copy here, and I'm not certain what next steps are, but I do ask and request that the board not take action on Roosevelt or Dunbar-Pulaski until we go back to talk about and look at the holistic systemic plan.
So thank you very much. And so we have before us a recommendation to extend Edison's contract for 2 years. So are you saying that you don't want to have us take action on that today because you have a different plan that you'd like to propose than what the current work that you've been doing for Edison?
That's directed at me.
Yes.
Yes, that's exactly what we're saying. We're saying today that we believe that that the piecemeal approach won't work. What we need is a full systemic approach. We have the outline for that. We would like to move forward on completing that and come back in January with a full and complete plan, which may include extending it, but will be a multi-year plan for the entire district as opposed to just one school.
Okay.
I'd just like to add one more thing. I just want the board to be aware that Gary is my home, but I have done work in New York, Chicago, Pembroke, Illinois, and all of the hard-to-hit areas where underserved children are. And so Gary is my home, and that's what I want to do with it.
Brad?
And Dr. Pruitt, I just want to tell you, I think those kids up in Gary are fortunate to have you advocating for them because you can hear your heart and your comments, and you've been heard, and thank you for what you do in Gary and what you're doing and for the calling that you feel. I do want to ask a question about what you're asking the board. If the board was to give you time to work with both board and department staff on creating a plan, when do you think you'd be in a position, I know you have an executive summary for us today, but when would we be in a position that we could consider a plan? And the reason I'm asking for board and department assistance in the actual plan is that for the reasons we've outlined, that we're addressing all those systemic things we talked about today in the earlier conversation. I think they could help give some guidance to you so that when you come back with a plan, there's a reasonableness that we're all kind of on the same page about what you're trying to do. When do you think you could be in a position to do that?
January 2015.
Okay.
So at our January 11th meeting, I think it is? 7th.
And we do want everyone there. As I sat in the room and listened to the different conversations going back and forth, we want everyone working together.
Okay, and I have a motion rolling around in my head, but I don't want to take the floor. There may be other board members that want to comment, but I would hope that we could try and find a win-win here.
I just have a question.
Yeah, Andrea?
Yeah, I'm curious about the extent of the financial needs. Will your plan include a proposal for tapping new funding sources? Have you identified the sources? Is there legislation that will be connected to the plan you submit?
I can't state if there will be legislative, but I have started talking to the senators, et cetera, and I'm hopeful of that. There will be other areas in which to tap into additional finances. So it may be stated there, but I can't speak for the legislators.
So Andrea, this is very complicated work that we're engaged in. It has to do with the high-quality plan. It has to do with audits that need to be performed. It's a very complex work that we're actually engaging in. And so we do have meetings set up with several partners. We have meetings set up with Scholastic and Edison, and we have several things going on in Gary, Indiana right now. We have our district turnaround director.
Is board staff at these meetings?
No, because this is the work of the department.
So you don't want to
We haven't
communicate with
engaged
them?
in any conversation until today regarding Roosevelt.
Well, I'd like board staff, Adam. I think that'd be good to, this thing to all be together. Will you please see to that for
But
us?
if I understand you correctly, you're not necessarily going to make a proposal just to work with Roosevelt. You're actually wanting to do a proposal to work with the district.
Just to make a,
Just different.
just want to make a point. Roosevelt's under turnaround status. It's under
it
this
is.
board now. And we're real interested in this systemic approach, if you heard that. And so board staff will want to be involved in these discussions. So as we reach the January meeting, we're together.
Well, that's what sorry.
Sure.
That's
That's
where
what
I
he
was
just
kind of
said.
leaning with a recommendation and a motion is that because of that very reason, that we basically direct board staff to engage with Gary and with Edison along in collaboration and consultation with the department on a plan, frankly, for both schools, but understanding that the board has statutory responsibility specifically for Roosevelt, but I would hope that plan then could incorporate, and I think this is where you were going
That's
with
where we
Mr.
need to
Elsner,
be.
it'll incorporate the recommendations of the subcommittee of the board that's been looking at turnaround. I think that's a reasonable middle ground here to try and address what you're trying to go for, at the same time looking at the systemic solution that we've been talking about.
This superintendent said arm in arm. I like that.
And unless there's more discussion, I'd be happy to actually make that the motion, but that's what's rolling around in my head that would be a reasonable.
Well, Brad, that's actually one of the recommendations. It says to
It's in
assess
there.
Gary Community School Corporation and Edison's proposed plan presented to the committee at the Gary meeting for Edison Learning to serve as external partner to Gary Community School Corporation in formulating and implementing a district-wide
It's in-
school improvement,
So,
including schools under state turnaround.
so maybe we just move on that part. What I was trying to get us out of, Tony, was that it talks about us renegotiating their contract, and I'm hearing they don't want to do that. So maybe we just limit the scope of what's being recommended in front of us to that point.
Yeah, I mean, at least for now, quite frankly. But I want to make some comments about this because for Dan and Sarah and those of us that were here at the beginning of this process, what a difference in terms of the relationship now between Edison and Gary Community School Corporation from what we dealt with really that first year and a half of this process. And I mean, I'm so excited I could do backflips out of here right now because this was not forced upon them. No one came in and said, you're going to partner with so-and-so, you're going to partner with so-and-so. They came together on their own, and I really commend Cheryl and Tom for doing that, and it just shows the kind of leadership that we now have up in Gary with Edison Learning and with Gary Community School Corporation. And I think this is exactly the kind of model of where I think as a committee we were hoping to go, where the schools take ownership of their own situation and reach out and find someone of their own choosing to work with. And I think they've selected a good partner here. I mean, from what I've seen from being in the building at Roosevelt, and from some of the other non-quantitative indicators, I mean, it's definitely a better school since Edison Learning has been there. So I'm very excited about the prospects of them partnering to improve education in all of Gary.
It's worth noting that leadership focused around children and the future of a community can get a lot done. Leadership worrying about who's got power and dividing and fighting, who suffers? Young people that missed a lot of school last year. So I think you're right. It's about leadership, and it's about leadership on the right issues.
And importantly, from a difference from our prior way of operating, leadership of your own choosing. It's very important that they're choosing to be married, if we go back to our old analogies.
We had
So-
some marriage discussion in the committee, shotgun marriages versus
So I'm
arranged marriages versus.
I'm very
True
excited
love.
about this relationship, and I support what you all are trying to do 100%. I'll just make one comment on the funding issue. I mean, currently now, if you just look at the most recent award of the school improvement grant, between Roosevelt and Gary Community School Corporation, they're getting $3 or $4 million in school improvement grants right now. What I've seen in their proposal suggests they need about $3 million over 4 years. So price-wise, we may be close anyway.
$3 million, I believe, $3 to $5 million per year.
Yeah. And that's
on
for
one
your, yeah,
side.
and the
Okay.
most recent SIG is $3 to $4 million for a year, so.
I just want to clarify for the motion, you're including both the Roosevelt School as well as Dunbar-Pulaski in this plan. Is that correct?
So I think
You only
Yes.
mentioned one school. I just want to make
No,
sure.
my intent was both.
Yeah,
I'm
both,
sorry,
because-
in other words,
That's part of the
honoring-
system.
Yeah, the idea would
honoring
be
the
to,
vision that Dr. Pruitt has put forward, which is she's looking for a district and a systemic solution. I'm saying, I recognize that we have responsibilities statutorily for Roosevelt. Can we include the motion to be a plan that addresses both?
correct, yeah.
So that would be the motion that I'd offer.
Second.
any more discussion? Roll call.
Yes. Mr. Alger?
Yes.
Dr. Freitas?
Yes.
Mr. Henry?
Yes.
Ms. Neal?
Yes.
Mrs. O'Brien?
Yes.
Dr. Oliver?
Yes.
Mr. Walker?
Yes.
Mr. Watts?
Yes.
Mrs. Wicker?
Yes.
Superintendent Ritz?
Yes. Okay, I believe we have done 2 items. The State Board intervention for Lincoln and Dunbar, as well as Public Impact and School Turnaround Committee. What is the pleasure of the board for lunch?
I say a working lunch.
How about a working lunch,
Can we have
if we
a
could
10-minute
watch our
break?
chomp, a
Okay,
10-minute break?
So let's take
I
a
would just say-
recess for 10 minutes, and we will return to hear, we have several people here to speak regarding e-learning, so we're going to take e-learning next on the agenda.
Seems like we never get to